So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth edition of the webinar series of Community Conserved Areas in South Asia. And it's been a wonderful ride so far, and we've had some great speakers on board. And today we have a very exciting initiative from Arunachal, and hopefully we will find out more over this course of the talk. And before that, I was just going through a little bit of guidelines for everyone. We've changed the format a little bit to include more people and also to avoid what has happened in the past of Zoom bombing, which has happened. So therefore, some of the guidelines are if you have any questions, there are options, which is the Q&A box. So please ask all your questions in the Q&A box, and we will ask them to the speakers during the Q&A session. This session is being recorded and is also being broadcasted live. We will share the link, YouTube link, on the chat box with all of you so that you can share it with the others who may not be able to attend the Zoom, but also want to watch it right now. It will also be put up to you on YouTube for larger dissemination later on. And for any queries or suggestions, or if you want to also subscribe to the CCA South Asia e-list, please write to us at iccsouth.asia@gmail.com. So without further ado, I would like to invite Nima, who is going to give us a brief introduction and context of CCAs in South Asia. Nima, over to you.
Hello, namaste everyone. Good afternoon to you and a very warm welcome again, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Nima. As Shruti mentioned, I'm a member of Conservation and Livelihoods team in Kalpataru, based in Pune. I'm also a member of a team that coordinates the activities of ICCA Consortium in South Asia region, about which we will be talking a little bit later on. And it is this team which is bringing this series of webinar to all of you today. So just to give a little bit of a context, although I do feel that the context of this webinar on community conserved areas doesn't really need a description, because it has been playing out in front of our eyes and impacting our lives severely in last few months. But before that also, in last 2 years, we have been seeing unprecedented uprising and strike by youth globally, demanding from the current generation and from the current global leaders to change the way they have been doing business thus far, because of this huge concern they feel for their own future because of climate change and its impact on nature and almost every sphere of life. This is also something that the indigenous and local communities, Adivasi communities, fishing communities have been, and all other communities which continue to live very close to nature, have been warning us, have been demanding, and have been saying that all our social, political, spiritual, cultural crisis that the society is currently facing is because of our dysfunctional relationship with nature, our broken down relationship with nature. But in addition to that, last year, we also saw a report which came out, which was produced by a large group of scientists and all different actors globally, as part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which brought out some really alarming facts, which said that human activities are threatening with extinction over 1 million species Also, that they've been threatening their own existence because annual global crop production is seriously impacted because of disappearing pollinating species. Over 1 billion jobs and livelihoods are which are directly dependent on nature, are highly threatened currently. Over 300 million people are at risk of floods and hurricanes because of loss of coastal habitats. Uh, but in addition to that, I think almost to give life to these concerns which were being raised by the youth, the indigenous communities, the scientists globally, the earth came up to show what this impact would be. And in 2019, we saw an unprecedented rise in global temperatures, some experts giving Earth only 2 decades of survival. We also saw extensive forest fires in different parts of the world. And just was the beginning of this year. I mean, the impact is in front of all of us. A tiny virus showed us that it can bring to our lives to a grinding halt. Uh, this also brings us to a point where we say there is no way but to change the way we have been doing things. And it is not surprising, therefore, that just last week we have first ever UN Global Summit on Biodiversity, where over 100 heads of states came together and pledged to do something for biodiversity conservation. The UN Secretary General gave a call for declaring the year 2021 as the year of nature, and he said that where we change our course of action. There was a call also to bring about 30% of the world under conservation. The thing is that it's a very good and noble intention, but the question is, how do we go about doing it? In these various reports and in the global summit, it also came out very clearly that our current ways of biodiversity conservation have not really been able to achieve the objectives. Secretary General said that with all our current investments, effort globally since 1993, we have only been able to save the decline of about 4 dozen species. WWF Living Planet report says that since 1950s, two-thirds of the wild population is on the decline. The Secretary General also said that we have been able to barely meet our global conservation goals, including Aichi Target 2020, and we are already in 2020. So the question is that if we have not been able to do this till now, where should we look for answers? What is it that will arrest this crisis, the planetary crisis that we currently face? And this is what perhaps takes us to this report, which came out a few years ago, which was produced by World Bank, which said that 22% of the world landmass currently is occupied by indigenous peoples, and that landmass contains 80% of the planet's biodiversity. So as against this 80% of land, which is facing this huge crisis, we have 80% of our biodiversity in 22% of the world's land, which is under the control of the indigenous people and peoples. So it is here that we look for answers. How do we do things differently from now on? How do we arrest the decline of biodiversity the way it has been? These various reports, including the IPBES report that I mentioned a little while ago, clearly says that the worldviews and ways of being and the traditional knowledge systems of the local communities have been conserving and protecting nature. Their ways of conservation is such that it is not separate from other spheres of our lives, our economy, our livelihoods, our cultures, our spirituality, our social life is not distinct from nature. We are very much part of nature. And this is what brings us to the title of our conversation today, or this webinar series, which is ICCA's Territories of Life. This is how they are increasingly globally known as, and in South Asia, we use the term Community Conserved Areas, or CCAs. So what are CCAs? So they are defined as in various conservation documents by IUCN and by Convention on Biological Diversity. They've been defined as territories and areas governed, managed, and conserved by indigenous peoples and local communities. So they have three defining characteristics, these ICCAs, that a deep, strong bond exists between the community and its territory, which is a mountain, forest, freshwater, coastal, whatever the territory is. The community has a de facto capacity to take decisions and enforce rules in that territory, and decisions and rules are positive or having positive conservation outcomes. And they're also positive for the livelihood and well being of the community itself. It is very clear that since we are only left, we are talking about 22% of the world territory, these indigenous peoples' lands and territories are highly threatened. They face threats from the fact that their legal status is unclear. They are not recognized in most countries in law. There is lack of information about them, lack of visibility and recognition of their significance for conservation of biocultural diversity. They face immense threat from our dominant paradigm of development, which lead to mining, dams, roads, infrastructure development, and they also face a threat to their lives and their territories when they want to defend their territories against these external projects. And of course, a lot of internal changes that they are undergoing because larger context around us. So this is why a group of people who were working with such communities, and many community leaders themselves came together in 2010 and formed a consortium, a global consortium, which since then has been trying to raise the awareness about the role of ICCAs in biodiversity conservation in being able to address some of the crises that the planet faces, including climate change. They have been negotiating in various international treaties and conventions. They are largely with a main mission for appropriate recognition of ICCAs. It's a member-based consortium, and members are organizations and federations of indigenous peoples and local communities and NGOs directly supporting or working with them. They also have honorary members who are individuals who would like to support ICCAs associated with the consortium. So in 2000, one of their main the ICCA consortium has three main focus areas by which they support the ICCAs globally. One is by documentation and mapping of ICCAs to bring about that visibility that we were talking about, empowering and defending ICCAs through legal and policy support where they are fighting to defend their territories, and enriching ICCAs by providing support in ecological restoration, governance and management planning, livelihood concerns, or whatever may be the local needs on the ground. In 2019, the members associated with ICCA Consortium in South Asia region came together and decided to form also a regional group at the South Asia level so that the similar recognition in South Asia for ICCA in South Asia could be brought about. So it is as part of this team's effort that we are bringing this series of webinar to you all, which the intention is to bring ICCAs in different countries in South Asia, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Maldives, and spreading over different ecosystems, wetlands, grasslands, high altitude, mountains, forests, marine and coastal areas, essentially to create this dialogue about an alternative way of conservation of biodiversity, biocultural diversity, and bringing a greater meaning and connection for all of us, not just the indigenous people and local communities, but for all of us with the nature around us, reconnecting with nature. Um, if you would like to be, as Shruti already mentioned, if you would like to be part of this effort, please write to us at the email ID that is circulated. We will also send it in the chat box. Any suggestions, comments that you have, and any suggestions that you have towards any of the communities that could be called for this to this webinar, please do write to us. Thank you very much. And Shruti, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Dima. So, without much further, before I introduce the speakers, I would like to remind people once again that during the course of the speakers presenting whatever they are, and if anyone has questions, there is a Q&A box. So please address all your questions there, and we will take it towards the end of the entire session, which is during the Q&A session. So please use that box to address all your questions. So without further ado, I'll invite Kamal Medi, who's the landscape coordinator of WWF India, to talk about the initiative of CCAs in Western Arunachal. Kamal, over to you.
Thanks, Shruti. Thank you, Nimazi. Also, I thank ICC Consortium and Culpabricks to giving us this opportunity to present our work. Uh, good evening, good afternoon, or good morning to all participants out there. So I take this opportunity to also introduce my colleagues here. So Pijus is also with me, and there's Pema, and we also have community representative Zamsiring. He is also a ZPM from the landscape that we work. So without much delay, so I'll just quickly share what we do. I'll just share my presentations. Shruti, can you just let me know if it is visible?
Yes, Kamal, it is.
Thank you. Yeah, so WWF has been working in a different part of country, and we also start working in Arunachal Pradesh for a long time now. But the whole initiative of community conserved area had initiated at around 2004 and so on. So once we had understanding about the significance of the landscape and the state, the demography, and the other governing practices of the state, we thought like this is only the one of the solutions to the securing biodiversity of the regions. So there is no separate introduction to the state, so something like if you're talking about Arunachal Pradesh, there is a significance that we could talk about. It is also known as in country like us is lungs of India. So this is where like most of the carbon sequestrations happen. Around 15% of carbon sequestrations of the country is actually taken in Arunachal Pradesh forest. And often we also talked about Brahmaputra basin and its initiate from Tibet and so on. But if we look at like whole basin of Brahmaputra, it is 83% of Brahmaputra basins are actually in Arunachal Pradesh, around 3,000 tributaries that the mighty Brahmaputra has. The significant tributaries are from Arunachal Pradesh. So another significant point is also like most of the landmass, it is actually belongs in this state. So what is the legal status of the these forests are? So 80% out of 80% that forest cover that state has, around 40% which is like reserve forest or protected areas of that area that is governed by the government authorities and the different institutions. However, a large section of forest areas are actually classified as unclassed state forest, which is accounting around 60%, will be around 3,000 square kilometers are pristine, forest, which is categorized as unclassed forest, but de facto it remains with the local communities. So this is what is the stand out of this state in terms of coverage of forest as well as its management and legal rights of the forest that belongs to a different group of people. So I'll come to the landscape that we work directly, and my colleagues are there, so they will explain more details about their involvement with various aspects of engaging with local communities out there to secure biodiversity of this area. So Arunachal Pradesh actually covers around 80,000 square kilometer of landmass, which is one of the largest state in the country, and especially in Northeast is one of the largest. And we work in two districts, that is Tawang and West Kameng, which is sharing border with Tibet in northern boundary, and western boundary it's shared with Bhutan. So it is also has space like Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary and so on, a sharing border with these landscapes. Therefore, there is also a quite, when we worked on conservation in this part, there is also transboundary collaborations that could happen for a species like mega species like snow leopard and perhaps red panda. So this, the significance, if you're also looking at, this is also in Northeast is actually known as rainbow state. There is a lot of ethnic groups, tribals, different tribal groups. In Arunachal Pradesh, there are 26 major tribes, more than 100 sub-tribes we do have. But in these two districts, Western Arunachal landscapes, it's predominantly occupied by the Buddhist Modpa communities. So they also have a regional, dialect and regional subcategories. They are also like in the upper ridges of that district, particularly Tawang area. The people are known as Tawang Monpa. In middle part, they are Dirang Monpa. They are known as Dirang. There is also even like within a Dirang Monpas, there are different dialect. They speak different language. So there are diversity within those categories as well. And there is a like in the lower part of the landscapes around foothills of these two districts in West Kameng are Kalaktang Monpa. So there are distinctly three categories. Within those three categories are also there are multiple dialect around them. Apart from Monpa, which is a large chunk of populations in this landscape, there are also other categories of tribal communities who belongs to like Miziaka, Bukun, and Setupens. It is the most of the areas in these landscapes are very sparsely populated. Human population that density is much lower than the rest of the country. We have around 17 person per square kilometer as far as 2011 census is concerned. However, there is also another aspect of the increase of population. It's much higher than the national average. So there is also things need to be noted. When we talked about conservation, the population has been increasing in the states as far as the average annual population increase. There is also numerous demographic changes are happening because of the border angle to this. There is sharing border with Tibet and Bhutan. So there is a lot of presence of army and paramilitary forces. If we look at the significance of biological diversity of this landscape, uh, so one thing that stand alone is like there is a bird diversity. That is, the bird diversity is across Arunachal Pradesh, which is half of the bird species that found across Arunachal, across country. So for instance, like some of the migratory species, the two wintering habitat that found in the country are found in these two districts only. So there is a significant biological diversity in that area. So there is also plant diversity quite high. Around 5,000 species of flowering plant is found in this state, and also this particularly these two districts are also standalone in terms of species diversity is concerned. Some of the species like which can be named as snow leopard, red panda, Himalayan black bear, serow, are some of the species that we have reported from this area. Around 85 mammalian species, 500 bird avifauna, and more than 36 species of rhododendron. Another major USP of this area is orchid. Like we also one of that kind of sanctuary that is being designated as orchid sanctuary fall under this landscape only. So apart from species and flowering plant, these are also home to some of the high altitude lakes. So we have around 1600 plus high altitude lake across state. However, there are also number of lakes in Tawang and West Kameng district, which is above 3000 meter altitude. So they actually plays a very significant role in terms of ecological services to the downstream. So one thing that across Arunachal Pradesh, it's around 60% forest that categorized as unclassed state forest. But in these two districts, around 75% are unclassed state forest, and in de facto, it remains with the local community. For instance, in Tawang, there is no protected area. There is not a single protected area. In West Kameng, there are one protected area, which is Eagle Nest, around 200 plus square kilometer of area. So that's actually makes a lot of importance in terms of engaging with those communities who are actually holding those right, and as well as they are the manager of this area. So to work with them, to guide them to do our conduct. So the biodiversity variations is also one of the another influencing factor is the altitude variation of this area. So Tawang and West Kameng, the Tawang, for instance, it starts from foothills of Assam around 500, and it's gradually go up. And one of the highest peak of the state is belongs to this landscape only. So it is capturing wildlife sanctuary around 7,090 meter altitude. So that actually signifies the various diversity of this area in terms of different species, different plant diversity at different gradient of altitude. Apart from flowering and other diversity, as I said, there are also lakes that you will find under high altitude, which is also known as syntax on the top of the. But this is like what we have, but the sceneries are not as rosy as we are talking about. There are changes are happening. There are internal changes are happening within communities, which is like traditional practices are evolving. There are changes are happening. There are different aspirations. The youth would like to have a different life. They would like to have their own income generating activities, or they would like, so out migrations are also something that we could see, which is in Western Himalayas, which is very pertinent. However, in Eastern Himalayas are also that is picking up. Say for instance, like there are people are going out of the village, even like within the district they are going to the township. So that's sort of the influence, external influence, market economy influence are happening within the communities. There is also external influence like hydro powers. All of us know about it. Like we have around 150 proposed hydroelectric power projects across the state. There are significant number, more than 20s are proposed in the landscapes. So those will have a certain impact to the forest and conservations in long run, both forest and hydrology. Linear infrastructure for civilian use booming up. So one of the things that you could see in the map in the screen here, so there are protected areas. Some of the things that you could see is these are the areas which is like biologically significant areas, which is being recorded earlier. So those are not fall in protected regimes, any of it. It's all are USF, all controlled by local communities. So unless and until we have a very good, unless and until we address those threats in those areas, there is always issues, particularly in that areas in terms of biological conservation is concerned. So as I said, there are pressure from linear infrastructure, road, defense, and so on. But as I said, like there has to have a middle part. It can't be a single way, not happening. So there, if linear infrastructure has to have in conversations with local community and so on, so they need to be taken in confidence. So the mechanism need to be created. So apart from other external threats, there is also anthropogenic pressure, commercial hunting, commercial extraction of timber, land use changes are happening, the agriculture coming up, new crops are coming up. So there are a lot of issues that is also emerging in the landscapes in the long run. So this map also shows like some of the plant infrastructure, including railways, that is being proposed in various part of the landscapes. Perhaps this is one of the survey that the recently being done by railways to take railways to Tawang. So there are definitely the development is needed in for all of us. However, there are certain second balance has to be need to be considered through consultations. So I'll just jump into the why we need CCA at the first place, and what is that we understand when we talked about CCA. It is resilient economies. It also addresses well-being of the local communities. We also would like to recognize and exercise traditional rights of these communities, not only to own, but it for a long-term sustainability management of those areas in for a long-term conservations, plus they're securing their well-being of local people. So there is an interlink between both. So we would like to recognize and strengthen that point. We also the value that we also uphold is inclusive conservation. The all actors need to be part of it, and that is what we do when we promote conservation dialogues in the villages. And this is something that we will hear from our colleagues from the field in short time. So the process that we do follow, first, what we do is basically identify conservations area in both culturally significance in terms of their religious belief, their sacred forest, as well as biological significance of those areas. So as I said, there are species that is there, including red panda, snow leopard. So what is the ecological benefits of ecological needs that those species would like to have in terms of the species are concerned? So those are being addressed, and also that there is always a to and fro discussions happens with the local communities to meet that to arrive to that consensus. Once the areas is being identified, village locations are identified, the village communities are taken into confidence. That is, these are all driven by the local community itself. So we facilitate the process. However, that is the entire entire things are being driven by local communities only. So that discussions happens not only within the communities, but also any other communities who might get influence. For instance, like securing this forest, are we curtailing somebody's right? So we address those elements as well during this conversation and discussions. Once we have that understanding with local communities, there are consensus from a larger group of communities from within the conservation area and the surroundings. Then we come to a formation of management committee, which is comprises of local leaders. So that's how the management committee formed. We also very categorically address inclusion of women participation into this process. So because their voice need to be heard in when we take certain decisions on conservations of community forest. Once that is those processes are being done, then we do a mapping exercise with local communities. That brings what is where, what is grazing ground, how these people are, how the communities use different. And this is one of the process that also a very learning interactive process between older generations to and younger generations. They explain like what the areas fall in. And there is also like very fascinating about this exercise is the people actually argue about like what falls and which boundary, what grazing grounds fall where, what the rivers comes from which lake, and etc etc. So those are quite fascinating, and that's become a quite a interactive sessions with local communities to bring all of us together to have a larger management practices. So that lead us to formulate a formal management committee then panchayat proclamations happens, which is like, the panchayat is a legal, authority in a village. They can take a certain decisions on behalf of larger communities. So they are the umbrella institutions. They are on the top of every decisions that being taken. But management committee is somebody who are actually accountable to panchayat, as well as they have a certain rights and decisions making power. So they does certain, that's being recognized by the panchayat to do certain conservations work. So once the management committees are formed, they are frame rules and regulations. They are also taken to some of the, they decide what economic incentive programs to be promoted in the landscape, in that CCAs in their village, and accordingly, like certain assessment is being carried out to do so. So there are economic incentive programs which are in the villages. As I said, like these are only economic incentive. We are not talking about addressing any primary livelihood at this juncture. We would like to add certain values to their annual income through a certain value additions, adding some of the economic incentive programs to the family. So that's, so once this process takes around like 3 to 4 months, more than at some point of some villages even longer, almost till a 3/4 or almost a year. So once that is being arrived, then we come to a management plan, like what area need to be secure, how the grazing should happen, because in this landscape they're mostly like agriculture and pastoral community. So they mostly practice, there are yak herders, there are other grazers, so sheep grazer and so on. So their user rights are need to be also addressed when we are talking about land owners, when we're talking about the CCAs at a larger scale. So how that will be managed, like how will be influencing the all those rights. That's basically, when I said we, it's basically particular we are talking about CCA management committee. So that is, once those understanding happens in almost a year or so, then we put a certain framework as a management plan. So that's become like one of the guiding principle for management committee to look after their area. So that is also eventually being shared with the larger community, take consensus from the larger panchayat, and that is being regulated through rules and regulations, and putting signboard and signages, and talking to a larger through various media. So when we talked about biological, securing the areas, we also very, focus. We also facilitate management committee to do certain aspect, like to understand like what is the biological diversity of that area through surveys. Though it is not a scientific rigor at some aspect, but it is a more of an applied research survey that we promote to get, for instance, like checklist of that area and so on. So that's being done by the local community. And while doing this, like once you can see the one another photographs on the top right, is the communities who are patrolling. It's basically just monitoring their area. So this is all a high altitude area. They can't do monitoring within a day or so. So they need to go to a certain area and halt for a couple of days to monitor their. So for instance, like Thembang Bapu CCA that my colleague will be talking about, they actually has around 635 square kilometers, which is a greater than many of our protected area in the country. So they are managing that. So that's area needs a certain, people participations, and they need to take care of that. So while we collect those informations, we also strategically share those informations with community, especially like young generations, like, what is black neck crane is all about, what is red panda is all about, what is snow leopard, how they're, so that's one part of species, and how the nature and humans are interlinked. For instance, like today's aspect is very pertinent, like how the COVID has been, out, that's the whole pandemic has outbreak, and how that relate to our day-to-day life. So once we have all those information, the baseline and reports are being generated for CCS. So currently at this point, we have 9 CCAs in last one and almost 15 years of our work. So that covers around 1,500 square kilometers across both the district. So as I said, the Thembang Bapu, which is you can see here, so this is one of the largest CCA that we have, around 635 square kilometer. Rest of them are little smaller CCs, but 100 and 150 square kilometers of that area. So they are there those forests are home to some of the species like this. So red panda, this is photographed one of our community member. He's a secretary of one of the CCAs in Jimitang Valley. So which is again like on a tri junctions between one side is Tibet, another side is Bhutan. So one of the pristine forests you could find in one of our study that shows like one of the best habitat you could find in Jimitang. Again, like those are the areas are in community owned. So this is again photographs taken in 2017 June. This is a camera trap photo. It's again taken from Thembang. So on a high altitude area, this is first photographic evidence of snow leopard from the state. So far we know like there is a evidence, there are signage of snow leopard, and so we know like there are habitat for snow leopard, but there were no the photographic evidence so far. So this is first photographic evidence that we found from the CCA. So again, like while the people are securing their own forest, so how are we going to talk about sustainability? There are anyways what I'm talking about. It's a lot of as a rosy picture, but there are also challenges in terms of to get things done and get reach to this level. Also takes time, resources, are commitments, not my our as a organization's commitment, but the community, they are actually reaching out different including social organizations, government institutions, and so on. So their reach is, their struggle and their commitment is commendable. So while they are doing that, so are you also talking about how that can be sustained? So we actually tried out some of the economic incentive program. For instance, like NTP based livelihood in one of the CCAs called Mandla Fudung CCA. So we tried to do a sustainable harvesting of some of the species like Xanthoxylum, and also link with some of the companies who are looking for it. Again, like this is, it's not about only the communities are deciding. It is taking everyone's in consensus. There are 119 households involved with this NTFP based livelihood programs in one of the CCA. Similarly, community-based tourism, we actually talked about how we could engage maximum households through this process is something that we are more concerned. Like, that's, it's not about like 1 or 2 persons or elite of the societies are getting benefited. How are we going to be a more into the, that's the rest of the communities are also, especially like forest and, households are being part of this process. How, so that's the model that we are trying to build. So we had succeed in some cases, but there are always challenges that we could discuss in Q&A. So again, like in this pandemic also shown us some of the challenges, for instance, like food on the table. So when we talked about because if you can see, like in previous, there are a lot of developmental projects that are happening. There are opportunity for working in some of the sites like roadside and construction site and so on and so forth. So the people are mostly in mountains. They are actually digressing from traditional livelihood practices they used to do, which is one of the major food security system that they used to have, which is like slowly they are digressing from there. So that is also being recognized, and also communities realize that this is something that we should be holding on. Apart from whatever we do, that should be our core. And we also as an organization, as also the facilitator to some of the management committee. We promote sustainable harvesting, sustainable agriculture practices, providing, that's addressing like indigenous varieties of crops that remains there, and also like some of the concern that they face in that working of for instance, like that's raiding, crop raidings by some of the species. That's how we could protect their crops and so on. So those are the elements that we work together. One of the things that we, as I said, how the people are getting engaged to this whole incentive programs, like how we could involve every single. So if the people has a good house, they could go for a homestay or home restaurants and so on. So if the people are good with even like hunters, they could convert it to guide. So that's something that we are looking for, like so that's the model that we would like to uh, you know basically work on, like how we could convert the communities who are actually has their what is the USP of the person, like what is the talent of the particular person and so on. And even like so if the porters, because those are the high altitude treks, you need certain facilities and so on. So we could, there is an opportunity that we could engage every single individual, every single household, at least like if we could involve at least 60 to 70% of a household of a village in this process, our job is done, like with certain social welfare and benefits. We could cover another 30% of the households. So our motive is to cover at least like a maximum household in the village is concerned through various medium of job creations in through incentive program. So apart from that, like how the institution will survive, for instance, like that's how can we create a corpus for them. So though we have listed quite a bit of them, but some of them are not practically doable. So we are choosing the place to place what need to be done. But this is overarching model that we follow. So if the domestic tourist comes to a CCA to see and visit the CCA, then they will levy around 10% conservation fee that goes to the management committee to run their show. Similarly, if it is a foreign tourist, that's 15% goes to the management committee and that so and so forth. So that's how the whole CBT program is designed, and that is being applied in one of the CCA that my colleague will be talking about. Economic incentive programs, even like we talked about NTFP based livelihood. This is like just to give you one broad idea. The management committee is taken as a heart of this whole process. The households are linked with the management committee, and they are dealing with whatever the external influences are then. So management, where our investments mostly with the management committee, and the management committee taking certain decisions on what need to be done and so on. So those are the models, are work in progress, but there are learning that we could discuss in long run. So some of the achievements that we had so far is, as I said, like there are 9 CCS covering around 1,500 square kilometer. So in these 2 districts, around 25% of the community forest are covered under CCA model. So there is also a cascading effect happening. So for instance, like, the people heard about Thembang's initiative, Thembang CCA process. So neighboring villages are also taking care of the initiating CCS. For instance, like the villages that doing NTFP based livelihood in Manla Fudung, in around 5 years back, they heard about the story of Thembang and they approached us to actually educate. So we're saying like, instead of we saying like you go to the Thembang, you learn from the management committee, like people like Zamsering, who has been holding this whole process for a decade, more than a decade now. So they are the best persons to explain you what need to be done, what not, need not to be done. So what is the doables or not doables in this context. So there is also a cascading effect happening in this region. Thembang also, one of the success achievement is that they also got a grant from DST, and they have worked on some of the aspect like energy efficient sulas and some of the innovations program and marketing some of the crops that's has a market value in outside the landscape and so on. So that's something that the management committee are doing of its own. There is very limited input that we do, at this point. There is also a recognitions from the state, like, this is being taken up in some couple of state wildlife board meeting, and the chief minister has actually recognized that this is something that should be done at a scale in a state of Arunachal Pradesh, given like we have 30,000 square kilometer of forest that is being de facto remains with the local communities. How are we going to address their conservation regime in a long run? Based on our CBT model as well, there is also a uptake at a state levels where they have taken tourism policy based on the learning that we had over last more than one decade and so on. So this is what is basically the process that we do follow. I welcome my team members to talk about it. So thank you very much for listening to us. So if the Pema and Jamsiringji are around, so welcomes to take discussions ahead. Pema, are you there?
Hello, hi, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, Pema, we can hear you.
Hi.
Yes.
Yes, madam. So I have with me Mr. Jamsirin. He's a ZPM Jila Parishad member of our place. And at the same time, he's the secretary of the Thembang Bapu CCA Management Committee. So he will be talking about how the CCA was formed in Thembang and all the processes, then what are the challenges, how the villagers have received it, and then what is the future plan and all those things. So I'll just put on to him one thing.
Good evening, Namaskar. मैं जाम सिंह थेम्बांग बापू कमेटी सीसी मैनेजमेंट कमेटी का सेक्रेटरी. तो हमने आप लोग से कुछ शेयर रखना चाहूँगा क्योंकि हमारा जैसे हमने शुरुआत में हमने जैसे थेम्बांग बापू कमेटी का जो फाउंडर्स हम लोगों ने किया था इसी के बारे में. और मेरा एक चीज भूलने पाऊंगा क्योंकि मेरा जितनी आज थेम्बांग बापू कमेटी का जितनी थेम्बांग एरिया सी एरिया का जितनी फायदा हुआ जिसके लिए हम लोग के लिए चल रहा है, और मेरा कोलिग पीयूष जी और मेरा साथ में हमेशा टाइप होता था WWF का. तो शुरुआत हम लोग उन्होंने हमको ये किया था कि आइडिया दिया है ऐसे होने से क्या होगा, ऐसे होने से कैसे होगा. तो शुरुआत वो आया था मेरे पास, तो आके हम दोनों बातचीत हुआ था. तो उन्होंने हमको सबसे पहले बहुत अच्छा एक चीज दिखाया ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग के लिए. तो उन्होंने हमको शुरुआत किया था. तो ऐसे करते करते हमारा काम बहुत अच्छा हो गया क्योंकि ऑर्गेनिक तो हम लोगों के पास था ही, लेकिन बीज में घुस गया था इंसेक्टिसाइड क्या दवाई सब निकाल के और यूरिया और सब निकाल के बहुत कुछ बर्बाद होने जा रहा था. तो उन्होंने रुका कि हमको ये सिखाया. तो हम लोगों ने ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग शुरू किया. इसके बाद में फिर उन्होंने हमको आइडिया दिया था, तो आपका इतना अच्छा जंगल है, आपका इतना अच्छा जानवर है यहाँ पे, तो उसका कुछ मतलब ही नहीं रहता, कोई किसी को पता नहीं चल रहा है. तब हमने सोचा हाँ सही कहा कि हम भी अच्छा काम करना चाह रहा कि था. तो उस साथ में हमने शुरू कर दिया कि इसका हमारा गांव में सबको मीटिंग करवाया. तो करके हम लोगों ने, मेरा पास जितनी एरिया था शुरू में तो कवर नहीं कर पाएगा. पहले ट्रायल के लिए हम लोग 30 स्क्वायर किलोमीटर को हम लोगों ने एरिया मार्क किया इसके बाद में फिर हम लोगों ने 100 कुछ प्लस करके फिर दोबारा बनाया, फिर अभी हम 635 स्क्वायर किलोमीटर जो है अभी हम लोगों ने उसको करके रखा था। तो पता चला कि हमारा ये इसमें क्या फायदा हुआ है गाँव वालों को और हमारा एरिया को। तो फायदा ये हुआ कि हमारा वहाँ पे जितने जानवर था सबको देखने मिला, और लोगों को क्या है क्या चीज़ नहीं है फॉरेस्ट को बचाने के लिए हम लोग को आइडिया मिला। तो ऐसे करते 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 लोगों ने बहुत डैमेज कर रहा था उसको हम लोग रुकाया, और हमारा वहाँ का लोग भी अपना गाँव का लोग भी मालूम नहीं था कि पहले बहुत शिकार करता था, फॉरेस्ट को काट के जो बिक्री करता था, टिम्बर काट के बिक्री करता था और फायर बिक्री करता था। जब से ये हम लोगों ने लागू कर दिया तब से सबको मालूम हो गया कि उसको रुकाया, तो सब अभी अच्छा से उसको आज भी वो अच्छा से चल रहा है, सबको बंद कर रखा है, तो सबको अच्छा हो गया। इसके बाद में हम लोगों ने आस्ते आस्ते धीरे धीरे हम लोगों ने प्लान किया कहीं से मदद मिलेगा क्या, फिर आइडिया दिया इन्होंने, डेवलपमेंट ने आइडिया दिया हम लोग को, DST का फंडिंग हम लोग को दिया, फंडिंग किया है। तो DST का फंडिंग होने के बाद में हम लोग ने टूरिज्म शुरू किया, टूरिज्म का हम लोग को बहुत अच्छा हुआ, फायदा हुआ। तो फायदा होने के बाद में हम लोग ने क्या किया, आज वहाँ पे कहीं उस समय में होम स्टे का नाम ही नहीं था, होम स्टे बोल के हम लोग सुनता भी नहीं था। तो इन्होंने हमको आइडिया दिया होम स्टे जैसे चलता है तो बहुत अच्छा होता है, तो हम लोगों ने होम स्टे शुरू किया। सबसे पहले होम स्टे का शुरू करके हम लोगों ने बेनिफिट गाँव वालों को दिलाया। इनके साथ में टूरिज्म का गाइड, वाटर और कुक वो सब हम अपॉइंटमेंट किया। ऐसे करके सबको शेयर किया है, सबको शेयर करने का सबको फायदा हुआ। ऐसे करते करते हम लोगों ने बहुत कुछ देखा। इसके बाद में देखने के बाद में सबको पता चला, तो सब आदमी खुशी है, लेकिन एक दो आदमी बदमाश होता होगा, किसी को खुशी नहीं होता, जितने करने से खुशी नहीं होता, ऐसे भी होता है। लेकिन 10% 90% हम लोग का आदमी सब खुशी है। इसके बाद में हम लोगों ने फिर अभी प्लानिंग कर रहा है कि खुशी होने के बाद में जो आराम से बिजनेस नहीं होता है, नहीं होगा सोच के हम लोगों ने एग्रीकल्चर के ऊपर में हम लोगों के पास बहुत से कुछ सारा एग्रीकल्चर का क्रॉप्स होता है। तो क्रॉप्स को हम लोगों ने क्या किया, उसको पहले क्या करता था हम लोग का लोग मेज मकई होता है, मकई को सिर्फ थोड़ा बहुत खाता है, मैक्सिमम हम लोग दारू को हम लोग कन्वर्ट करता था, दारू बना के रॉक्सी बनाता है, लोपनी बनाता है, वैसे करके सबको खाने के लिए हम लोग को वैसे करता था। लेकिन अभी पता चला तो ये सब बहुत कुछ नुकसान चीज हो रहा है। हम लोगों ने वो भी सोचा कि फ्यूचर में हम लोग इसको आगे ले जाए। साथ में हम लोग का पास मरवा होता है और सरसों भी होता है और बहुत से कुछ हो रहा है हम लोग का पास, सब कुछ है। सिर्फ राइस कल्टिवेशन नहीं होता क्योंकि तो ऊंचा जगह है, तो उसलिए धान का हम लोग का पास थोड़ा व्यवस्था नहीं है। तो इसके लिए हम लोग बाकी सब कुछ होता है, इसको हम लोग किस तरह से अच्छा करने से कर सकते हैं सोच के हम लोग अभी प्लान कर रहे हैं इसको फ्यूचर प्लान के लिए। क्योंकि हम लोग का आदमी इतना ये नहीं हो सकता कि फायदा आज तक कर नहीं पाया, लेकिन हम लोग उसको करने के लिए, और हम लोग के पास अभी केबेज तो होता है, और भी सेल होता है, पोटैटो सेल, आलू सेल होता है, ऐसा कर करके सेल तो बहुत होता है। लेकिन हम लोगों ने जो अभी बाकी चीज को हम लोग को इसको किस तरह से करना है और क्या हम लोगों ने प्लान कर रहा है इसको फ्यूचर के लिए। और हमारा वहाँ में अभी थोड़ा सा तकलीफ है क्योंकि हम लोगों ने लास्ट ईयर तक हम लोगों ने DST भी हम लोगों के पास कुछ फंडिंग था, साथ में हम लोग का साथ में टूरिज्म चल रहा था, तो टूरिज्म से हम लोग को कुछ इनकम होता था। ऐसे कर करके हम लोगों ने कमेटी से हम लोगों ने अभी क्या बोलते हैं इसको हम लोग ने ट्रेकिंग करके आदमी लोग को सबको क्या जंगल में क्या होता है क्या नहीं होता है वो देखी, पेट्रोलिंग करता है। उसके लिए हम लोग ने अपॉइंटमेंट कर रखा। हम लोग का वहाँ में 8 क्लान है, 8 क्लान में चार पापू है, 4 गीला बोल के होता है। 4 क्लान जो गीला होता है, 4 क्लान जो पापू है। पापू जो है बड़ा क्लान है, पापू का एक साथ में गीला एक होता था पहले सिस्टमेटिक। ऐसे करके हम लोगों ने उसको करके रखा था हम लोगों ने पेट्रोलिंग के लिए। उसका फंडिंग के लिए हम लोग को बहुत तकलीफ हो रहा है अभी, क्योंकि जब ये लॉकडाउन हो कि ये कोविड की वजह से इतना नुकसान कर दिया, अभी टूरिज्म नहीं आता है हम लोगों के पास, कोई आना जाना नहीं होता है, तो हम लोग का इनकम पूरा बेग हो गया। तो इसे करके हम लोगों ने अभी थोड़ा सोचा है कुछ कर सकने से। अभी हम लोग फिर दोबारा कहीं भी रिक्वेस्ट कर रहा है कि हम लोग को पहले का जैसे DST जैसे है कुछ फंडिंग हो सकने से हम लोग को बहुत अच्छा होना था। हम लोग वो सोच रहे हैं, हम लोग का मांग है, और हम लोग आप लोग को रिक्वेस्ट भी करता हूँ सबको, जितने आज मेरा साथ में जो मेरा बात सुन रहा है, आप लोग सब हम लोग को ऐसे हेल्प कर सकने से अच्छा है। और हम लोगों ने आगे बढ़ करके हम लोगों ने बहुत कुछ करने के लिए प्लान है, क्योंकि हम लोग का एरिया जो है बहुत ज़्यादा भी है, सुंदर है, वहाँ में इतना अच्छा अच्छा रोडोडेंड्रन है, और वहाँ पे आगे तरह तरह का जानवर है, उसमें बहुत से सारा जानवर है। कोई किसने चोर करता है वहाँ से बाहर से आकर के हमारा बैक साइड में एक तो क्लाइन है मेन जीवो की, उन लोग जो है मैक्सिमम शिकार करता है, उन लोग आकर के हम लोग अंदर घुस जाते हैं, हम लोग कुछ कर नहीं पा रहा है क्योंकि इतना बड़ा जंगल है। तो हम लोग का 6-7 आदमी पेट्रोलिंग करने से कुछ पता ही नहीं हो रहा है कि कैसे कौन से आदमी को बच पाएगा। इसलिए अगर आप लोग उससे कुछ फंडिंग करके हम लोग को बचाने के लिए कुछ कर देता है तो हम लोग को बहुत से आगे बढ़ सकता है। और हमने वही सोचा कि जैसे जानवर हो गया, फॉरेस्ट हो गया, जितने अभी करने के लिए हम लोग का तो से पूरा रेडी है। शायद मेरा ख्याल में हम लोग का आज तक अपना एरिया जंगल बचा के ऐसे करने वाला शायद कम होता होगा, क्योंकि कोई जगह में तो गवर्नमेंट का जगह होता है, गवर्नमेंट एरिया होता है। हम लोग का यहाँ पे अपना नेचुरल हम लोग खुद जंगल को बचाने के लिए हम लोग का हक है, जानवर को हम लोग बचाने के लिए कुछ हम लोगों के पास हक है। तो वो जो है सबको रिक्वेस्ट है, क्योंकि अगर हम जैसे आदमी, हम लोग जैसे आदमी, हम लोग का गाँव वाला जैसे आदमी लोग ने इतना कोशिश करने के बाद में अगर आप लोग हेल्प कर देने से, तब हम लोग को चारों तरफ से हम लोग अच्छा होने का चांसेस बहुत ज़्यादा है। और अभी हमारा CC को देख करके बहुत से लोग को अच्छा लगने भी लगा है, क्योंकि बाहर स्टेट से भी हम लोग को देखने आया, हम लोग को पूछने आता है। पहले हम लोग कुछ समय पहले हम लोग सिक्किम से ट्रेन करके सिक्किम वाला का हम लोग लेके ट्रेनिंग दिया है उन्होंने। बाहर में हम लोग जाके देखा है, उन लोगों के पास ट्रेनिंग किया है, और जगह जगह में हम लोग किया। लेकिन आज के दिन में उन लोग हम लोगों के पास आते हैं बाहर स्टेट से। तो वो चीज़ हम बहुत हम लोग का है तो कुछ नहीं, लेकिन हम लोग सोच ये है कि उन लोग का माता पिता हम लोग आगे हो रहा है, तो उसको आप लोग और पुश कर देने से और अच्छा हो जाएगा। और हम लोग का ये CCA का नाम से और आगे जाने के चांसेस से हमने मेरा जिंदगी में बहुत से कुछ हम लोगों ने प्लान बनाया। सबसे अच्छा काम ये हुआ क्योंकि हम लोग सोशल वेलफेयर के लिए हम पूरा काम करके, हमारा छोटा से हम लोग का काम ही था। आज हम ये सबसे अच्छा दिख करके ये, क्योंकि हम लोगों ने पंचायत में रह चुका है, सब कुछ जिला परिषद तक बन के सब कुछ काम किया है। लेकिन ये बात नहीं है कि हम लोगों ने काम नहीं किया, किसी को फायदा नहीं होता, वो कि नहीं होता, फायदा तो किया है। लेकिन अभी भी मेरा हिसाब से ये CCA जो है बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है, क्योंकि अभी हम इसको थोड़ा और आगे बढ़ के कुछ कर सकने से अच्छा होगा जैसे लग रहा है। और इसके लिए आप लोग को सहयोग चाहिए। और हमारा वहाँ पे एक तो गाँव जो है, थेम्बांग गाँव जो है हमारा, शायद मेरा ख्याल में इंडिया में मुश्किल से 1-2 ठो होता होगा, क्योंकि वहाँ में पहले राजा था। राजा लोग को कहीं भी दिखता है तो हम लोग ये क्या बोलते हैं, उसमें कहीं भी जो रूइंस दिखता है, वहाँ में हेरिटेज जहाँ भी होता है, रूइंस होता है, कुछ पुराना किसे कुछ देखने के लिए होता है। लेकिन हमारा वहाँ पे लिविंग है, क्योंकि पहले जैसे था उसको ऊपर में हम लोगों ने अभी भी नहीं हट के वही जगह में बैठा। तो ये चीज़ को भी हम लोग का एडवांटेज, हम लोग का डब्ल्यू को हम तारीफ कर रहे वो कि नहीं है। उन्होंने हकीकत में उन्होंने शुरू में हम लोग को ये सब दिखाया। देखने के बाद में सोच कर मेरा दिल में भी ये सोच लिया कि हम जब से हम वहाँ का पंचायत होती है, हमने फायदा उठाया, क्योंकि हमको उस जगह को ऐसे जैसे कि ऐसे रहना है सोच करके हमने बहुत जुड़ गया। तो उसको आगे बढ़ते हम लोगों ने बाद में घूरते होल हेरिटेज के लिए हम लोग तय किया। उन लोगों ने सचमुच का गवर्नमेंट ने भी बात सुना। तो आज होल हेरिटेज के लिए अभी भी चांस तो है, लेकिन बाई चांस यूनेस्को एक्सेप्ट नहीं भी कर रहा है। हम लोग का स्टेट गवर्नमेंट ने उसको डिक्लेयर किया है, क्योंकि लिविंग हेरिटेज ये एक ही जगह है, इसको हम लोग खत्म कर देगा तो फिर बाद में कहीं भी नहीं मिलेगा हम लोग का, जैसे एक मनपाक एरिया में। तो ऐसे बोल करके इन्होंने हम लोग को गाँव को इन्होंने डिक्लेयर कर दिया, स्टेट हेरिटेज करके डिक्लेयर कर दिया। तो बहुत से अच्छा है। वो जो गांव में अभी भी हमने ऐसे रखा है कि मैक्सिमम हम और अभी भी वहाँ में कंक्रीट यूज नहीं करता है, सब कुछ नहीं करता, कुछ भी नहीं हो रहा है। हमारा रूपिंग एक तो से डाला हुआ है, क्योंकि ये जो है थोड़ा से मुसीबत है। पहले का जमुना में हम लोग बम्बू लगाता था, वो तो बीच में काटना हो गया, बम्बू सब सूख गया था, इसलिए हम लोग सेसिस में कन्वर्ट कर दिया। तो बाकी चीज़ जैसे है वैसे है अभी भी, इसलिए वो गाँव में भी हम लोग का इसका साथ में बहुत एडवांस है गाँव जो है। तो वो आप लोग आकर के आपको कोई भी दिखता है वहाँ पे आकर के दिखता है वो जैसे कि वैसे है, क्योंकि दो जगह गेट है, ईस्टर्न वेस्टर्न दो गेट है, उसमें दूसरा जगह से कहीं से भी आदमी घुस नहीं सकता है। अभी भी हम लोगों ने फोर्ट को रिपेयर करके जैसे बचा के रखा हुआ है। तो मैक्सिमम ऐसे है, इसलिए शायद मेरा ख्याल में लिविंग हेरिटेज जो है यही होता होगा, दूसरा जगह में शायद नहीं होता होगा। शायद यूनेस्को भी उसको एक्सेप्ट करता तो बहुत अच्छा था। तो मेरा तरफ से अभी जितनी हो गया, अभी फ्यूचर के लिए मेरा अभी जिससे बोला हम एग्रीकल्चर में हम जोड़ देना चाहता हूँ, हमारा कमेटी। तो उसमें भी हम लोग को आप लोग ध्यान दीजिएगा, क्योंकि आदमी एग्रीकल्चर से जीता है सब कुछ। तो उसको हम लोग जो हम लोग का वहाँ से क्रॉप्स निकलता है उसको हम लोग जिस तरह से कैसे करके हम लोग उसको सेल कर सकता है, और हम लोग का मार्केटिंग में हम लोग क्या फायदा हो सकता है, और वही करके हम लोग कोशिश करता है। और मैं ज़्यादा बोल के बहुत बोलने का नहीं है, इसलिए आप लोग को सबको थैंक यू करेंगे।
थैंक यू जाम सेरिंग जी और फेमा जी, आपका ये एक्सपीरियंस शेयर करने के लिए। Without taking much time, because we also have a couple of question answers. Before we take on few question answers, we have with us Jessica Stewart from the ICCA Registry and the UN World Conservation Monitoring Center, who has joined us, and she would like to talk about the ICCA Registry a little bit. So, Jessica. Jessica?
Well, the computer, and I don't know what to do. Why is this? Hello?
Yes.
Sorry, I am struggling to find, I can't seem to open up Zoom on my screen. So I'm just trying to share screen. Hold on a second.
Shruti, we can take on the questions
I
till.
think that's what it was. Okay, so can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry, technical difficulties. I'll put my video on as well, so then you can see me. So I'm just going to give a really short presentation about the ICCA registry, which some of you may or may not have heard of before. So my name is Jessica Stewart, and I work at the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Center. And at this organization, we manage lots of data on protected and conserved areas globally. And we also have a focus on ICCAs. So I'll just share my screen. Let's see. I'll just share my screen. So I'll just do a little presentation so you get an idea of what we do at WCMC. So let's see if I can get this to work. Can anyone see the screen yet?
Not yet.
No, not yet. Okay, I think my computer's having a bit of trouble today. Trying to share the screen. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, I think that should be working now. Is that, can you see the screen?
Yes, we do.
Excellent. Okay, so some of you may have heard of the ICCA registry already, but it's a specific database for territories and areas that are conserved by Indigenous peoples and local communities. So the sites that meet the ICCA definition. But as I mentioned before, at UNEP WCMC, we also manage data on lots of other different areas as well. So if you submit data on ICCAs, then this is the platform that the data gets shown on. So this is the ICCA registry webpage. And on this webpage, you can learn a bit more about ICCAs. You can find documents to understand how to participate in the ICCA registry. And you can also have a look at the online case studies that are written by custodians of ICCAs as well as the supporting organizations. So the database itself with all the ICCAs is securely kept offline, and any data that the custodians wish to be online is made available through these online case studies. So that's where all the ICCA information goes. But as you know, ICCAs can also meet the definition of a protected area. And so we hold a whole load of information on protected areas globally in the World Database on Protected Areas. So if you submit an ICCA data to UNEP WCMC, you can submit it as an ICCA, and you can also say that it meets the protected area definition, and you have the opportunity for it to go into this global database as well. And the other term that you would have been hearing a lot of recently is other effective area-based conservation measures. And we also have a database on these sites as well. So again, if you think that your ICCA meets this definition, then you can submit it as an ICCA and as an OECM as well. And all of this data is pulled together under something called the Protected Planet Initiative, which is a platform online for collating and sharing data on protected and conserved areas and creating statistics online. So we track progress towards different targets that are set for protected areas. So you can see where we are against the targets for terrestrial coverage, marine coverage, and different statistics based on whether the site is a protected area or OECM. So that's just a bit of an overview of the kind of data that comes in and where we will put that data. And just to say that any data submitted to us can be placed with restrictions from the data provider. So if you don't want to have the data publicly available, we can store it offline. So it's worth asking if there are any concerns. And then this is just a snapshot of a map. It's actually from last year, but the data hasn't changed a huge amount for those under Indigenous and local community governance in the database. But you can see the purple ones are the areas that we currently have in the World Database on Protected Areas that are under the governance of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Now, we know that there's a huge amount more out there. And so this is just a snapshot. So we're really working hard with partners to try and make sure that we're filling this data gap. And if ICCA custodians want to submit their data to us, then they're very, very welcome to do so, and we'll support them where possible so that we can make this data more accurate. I think I'll just leave it at that because I was just kind of coming in last minute to do a few, just giving a few bits of information about the data that we hold. So I'll maybe leave it for the Q&A, but if you want to ask me a question and there also isn't time in the Q&A, then I'm definitely happy to follow up with you afterwards because I know it's been a very kind of short intro.
Thank you, Jessica. In any case, I think Jessica can share her contact details in the chat so that if anyone also wants to write with more detailed questions, they can do that. Moving on to our Q&A, we can start with Rosama, who has asked about the funding cuts by the US government and on WWF, and will that affect this work in Arunachal?
Yeah, no, Arunachal has always been mostly funded through our national donors. So it was like Tata Trust was initially there. So it will not have an impact. And obviously that news is we are not very sure. So there are still people looking at it. What actually is the issue about there? But Arunachal works definitely will not get suffered because of this.
Right. So the next question is, what kind of data, both spatial and temporal, is gathered, analyzed, or discussed for formulation of CCA governance and management plan development?
Yeah, so basically, it is completely on the community to decide that which is the area they would like to keep aside to manage as in CCA. But as a WWF, our input is always like to try to kind of make them understand or try to tell them that what is the benefit of having bigger area for any conservation purpose, because to have a small isolated patch, probably because the area they have, such a huge area they have under their custody, to have some small pockets out of that for conservation may not really help in achieving a proper conservation objective. So we always try to discuss with them that what is the benefit of having bigger area for conservation, and how it can help to kind of promote certain conservation incentives for the villagers. Like if it's a small area, then there is huge limitations. So it's also happened that many a times we got more than one village come together with a contiguous spaces, adjoining contiguous spaces to come together and declare a single CCA. Yeah, so that's what we have been trying, so that because so that this CCS, this effort what the communities are putting forward is also contributing to achieve certain serious conservation goal. So that's also we try to work with them to make sure that is happening. So it's completely on them. So once the jurisdiction is clear that this is the area which is under their jurisdictions and there is no other village which is challenging it, so they do the mapping, then obviously we all go with the villagers for a physical survey before the final map is prepared and the demarcation is done. So we use also the GIS. So these are the kind of an inputs that goes from the WWF side to kind of add value to this community effort. Like we add to the technology thing, we add the scientific survey angle to it, so that the whole effort of the community are being kind of can be brought to a very higher level, rather than small isolated contribution or effort from their side.
Okay. Thank you, Piyush. There is Shomona Datta, who has asked on the YouTube chat as to, there are three parts to his questions. First is, how do you tackle tourist-related pollution like water, plastic pollution in CCAs? The second question is, are the management committees selling forest products and earning through them? How do you stop their over extraction? And the third question is, do the committees do the communities cultivate medicinal plants for sale? And it would be great if their CCA contact details be shared so that they can visit them to see the conservation practices.
So regarding the tourism, community-based tourism, the way it has been designed, because we don't have a understanding about the carrying capacity yet now. What is the carrying capacity in terms of number of tourist footfall that can be done? So, but we try to have a kind of an understanding, looking at also the capacity of the villagers, how many numbers of tourists they can really tackle with. So at this point of a time, there are kind of facilities for 10 tourist group at one go to come to the village and stay. Not more than 10 members group are kind of, and facilities are not available there. So it itself is trying to keep the things beyond kind of in a level where it may become unsustainable or difficult for community to deal with. Regarding the NTFPs, yeah, there is a whole methods that we have worked with the community. We use the welfare methodology to assess how much quantity of this NTFP is available in the CCA and how much can be collected in a sustainable way. And based on that, the CCA management committee framed the rules that, okay, these are the area from where this much can be collected. And so there is a whole collection protocol, which we have, the technical inputs we have provided to the villagers to understand that how much can be actually sustainably extracted. And CCA management committee is allowing villagers to only collect that much only. So that's how our input is going and help to help them to ensure that the collection is happening in a sustainable manner. And yeah, no, they are not cultivating as such. Yeah, Xanthosylum, something they do, but it's not at a cultivation mode, because our idea is also because there are so much of commercially high valued NTFPs in the forest. If that can be collected sustainably, it will also add a value for the villagers to kind of take care of that area, because that will add one more value for the community to secure that area and to ensure sustainable resource use is happening in the CCA.
The next question is, what about the role of women in the CCA process? This is by Manjula.
Yeah, so there are kind of 30% memberships in the CCA executive committee, the decision-making body, CCA management committee, which is there. But if you look at in general, the activities that is happening in the villages, like running a homestay or home-based restaurants, these are all women who are doing it. So particularly if you look at the tourism-related activity, even the NTFP collections. Yeah, so it's nothing like that. Certain activities are only males are doing, the females are not doing. So it's an equal opportunity for everybody. Though the intervention is planned at household level, but anybody from the house, whether it's male or female, can be a part of the process. So there is an open for them. But obviously, we are not imposing anything. It's up to them to decide how they engage or they become a part of the whole process or various processes which is there.
The next question is from Bipasha Paul. She's asking, is there a methodology in place for community-led biodiversity monitoring? If so, what is it?
There is no methodology as such that we do. Along with the villagers, we go for periodic surveys for documentations, and we prepare the documents with the pictorial things for others to also know about what is there in the village. Because our learning has been that all aged people, the earlier generations, are very much aware about what is there in their forest, but the young generation is not that much aware, and they were not interested also in the beginning. But when they started participating in these surveys, in documentation parts, in monitoring parts, so they also started realizing and appreciating what they have, and they started getting involved in it. So there is no methodology as such for monitoring. So whenever some experts come, if some bird experts is coming, we take their help. He'll go with the villagers to document the birds. If some flower experts are coming, we go for the flower documentation. That's so whenever opportunistically we keep monitoring and documenting it.
I think that I just add to his, this is most of things especially the patrolling and all of it. It's not a rigid methodology that we follow, like as Dr. Datta said about how the community take a certain decisions on. So for instance, the checklist, to make a checklist, they follow a certain pictorials things, and also discussing with communities. But one of the outcome that we could see like from this whole process is like, for instance, like, some of the people are sharing like how the hunting and how this whole patrolling is a tool for educations to our young generation. So like when we go for a patrolling with this, young kid and the older generations, so how that accents like, happens when we do a patrolling in 4 or 5 days. So that's whole educations itself is an outcome of this whole process rather than just counting how many birds and how many trees over there.
So the next question is also for you, Kamal, which is from Sahil. In setting up homestays, tourist infrastructure, and other livelihood initiatives, how much investment does WWF put in versus the contribution from the individual community member? Is there a cost sharing model or is it funded entirely by WWF?
Yeah, hi Sahil. So this is basically we don't this is not a cost sharing model at all. So we basically like invest a very minimum money to this to initiate. So for example, like that happens when we started. Like this is something is not in the radar in the homestay, for instance, like tourism and so on in the radar of government program at all. In 2004 or 2005. So initial that period of times we had to invest little bit of that is a this is a funding that it goes to the management committee to setting up the setting up the homestay, setting up the preparing trails of the in the forest for tourists per se, like setting up campsite, but nothing to do it. So there is a revenue side. So that's whole process. It is basically the investment in the initial stage. But today there is a lot of program that is being showing. As I said, like one of the achievement, one of the outcome of this whole initial process is that there is an uptake of the tourism policy at a state level. So they are now that there is a program that is being framed at a government level. There is a grant available for homestay to be set up in across other thing. So that's is being taken care of. So this is purely a decisions by the communities. They decide who will own a homestay, who will have a homestay. That's totally a management committee and at the larger panchayat level decisions that they take it. So that's a purely the whole investment, whole revenue sharing happens within the community itself. WWF play a facilitator role here. It's nothing. There is no sharing revenue sharing mechanisms involved to this. Hope I made this clear.
Thank you, Kamal. The next question is for the CCA committee members, so Jamji and Pimaji, which is to understand what type of pastoralism is practiced in Themba. How did they ensure that pastoralist practices is also included in the CCA conservation decisions? Pimaji?
Yeah, yes, madam. So traditional grazing practice is always there. Our people rear yak and sheep. They continuously move from lower elevation to higher elevation during the summer. So it's called summer grazing ground. So the upper part of CCA, where basically the alpine and subalpine areas are called summer grazing ground. Part of it are called summer grazing ground because people from other district they bring their yak and sheep to our place, and we have a traditional what do you call tradition of collecting some tax from them from the grazers. That is called summer grazing tax. So this tax will be in the form of cash as well as kind. So for every 20 sheep, we collect one sheep, and every yak and both male and female yak, we collect somewhere around 1 kg, 1.5 kg of ghee from the grazers. So this will be brought in the village and will be distributed to whole of the village. So this has been going on from for many generations, and this practice, since we have the best summer grazing site in the region, so the grazing practice is happening there, and sometimes we often being asked by the people that whether this grazing is creating any kind of pressure to us or not. But here in our case, the grazing, actually the number of grazers has reduced, because many people, younger generation, they don't want to do, they don't want to stay this hard life of staying in the, the big summer season in that altitude, or maybe for migration of this livestock from one place to another place is a very difficult job. So in fact, the number of grazers, it has reduced, and number of livestock also has been reduced. So it's not creating any kind of problem, any kind of pressure to us. But yes, of course, all the grazers they have been informed about the CCA management rules and regulations, and also how they will have to stay and what are the things they will have to follow. Suppose before creation of CCA, these grazers used to extract some kind of medicinal plants from the area, particularly cordyceps. We locally call it yarza gunbu. So other medicinal plants, high altitude, very rare medicinal plants, they used to collect, and they used to bring while coming down. So we have been successfully, uh, you know, uh, inform them about this, and sometimes if there is any incident, then the management committee in the association with the village panchayat, they will call the grazers to the village, and they will basically put some kind of punishment or some kind of fine they will have to pay for that. And they also would be given some kind of warning that from next time if they will do this, then they will be barred from going to that particular place. So this grazing practice is like part and parcel for of our tradition, because we depend on dairy product, particularly ghee and churpi, for our daily consumption, and they depend on us for grains. So they often used to come down and take grains from us, and we often used to go there, and basically some kind of butter trade keep on happening. So, but during winter time, since the area would be covered with the snow, so they will come down and they will go back to their respective villages. So, is it all right, ma'am? The question.
Thank you, Pemaji. That is
Yeah.
amazing. Very interesting to listen to this. Another question, one question is with respect to, for you again, Pemaji and Jamji, is
Yes.
how do you envision, or are there any youth who are involved in the CCA process? Um, CCA conservation and CCA committee, and what is the kind of role you've envisioned for the youth of your community? And
Yes.
if you can translate it to Jamji also in Hindi.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So the youth in our village, particularly in our village, they are very much what you call aware about the whole process of CCA. How does it work? And in the meantime, we have the uh, provision of going for change of management committee after 3 years. So before this present management committee, there were a whole lot of youth, village youth, taking up the post of management committee, and they have run it very well. They have shown many kind of innovations, particularly in terms of exploring new energies like solar water heater, yak dung briquette. So these were like some of the things that they have started. Apart from this, they are very much like part and parcel of our day-to-day work. Right now, since we thought that this management committee has to be synchronized with the village panchayat. Because of that, we have presently the whole village panchayat members has been made the part of the management committee.
इसमें मौका जैसे भी लोग सोचता होगा कुछ इसे नहीं है, ये हम लोग का जो भी है, हम लोग ने अभी जैसे बोला, जैसे कि अगर यूथ लोग के लिए भी हम लोग का जो कमेटी में जो होता है, कमेटी वाला ये करता है कि इसका सबको हम लोग ये करता है कि इनका जितने भी हम लोग को जैसे अभी टूरिज्म के बारे में जो करता था, हम लोगों को सब एंगेज करता है, उन लोगों को काम में लगाता है। और हम लोग अभी जैसे ट्रेकिंग जो करता है, पेट्रोलिंग जो करता है, वो लोग भी सब यूथ है। इनके साथ में जैसे अभी हम लोग का आजकल जो भी काम चलता है, सब हम लोग मैक्सिमम 100% यूथ लोगों को बीचता है, क्योंकि वो तो एज वाला तो जाने ही पड़ेगा। वो जो ये हम लोग का जो सीसी में अभी बहुत आगे जाना पड़ता है, पैदल जाना पड़ता है, घर रास्ता नहीं है, खुद लोग बुक जाना पड़ता है। इसलिए हम मैक्सिमम यूथ लोग को काम लगाता है। यूथ लोग को सब खुशी है उसके लिए। तो वैसे जैसे उन लोग जो करना चाहता है, जिसके पास कुछ मिलना है, हम लोग यूथ लोग को ऊपर ही खर्चा करते हैं सब। यूथ लोग उसको ठीक ही है, उन लोग का भी जैसे काम करने के लिए उन लोग को इंटरेस्टिंग है।
Thank you, Jamji. Thank you, Pemaji.
Is it all right, madam?
Definitely, yes. Nima wants to ask another question.
Thank you, Shruti. I had a question. I had two questions to Pema Sering and Pema and Seringji, and one question to Piyush and Kamal if they would like to answer. My first question was, now initially we got a sense that there was this traditional practice of ICCAs, and then there were some problems, and WWF intervened in the process. I was wondering to what extent WWF is still involved in the running of the initiative, or is it now more or less independent of WWF and facilitation processes by WWF? My second question was, I was wondering, Pema just mentioned that cordyceps is completely banned, which traditionally used to be collected by the pastoralist communities. So cordyceps is a very important source of income, and it has such high value. I was wondering if there is a compensatory livelihood, something that the people can actually do as a compensation, because it's such a high earning medicinal plant. In all these initiatives, wherever the community's activities have been banned, is there an equivalent sort of compensation or other ways by which the community is able to earn those livelihoods, or is it only going to create a greater sort of out-migration of the community in search of livelihoods? And my third question, sorry, was to what extent is the state laws and policies support initiatives of this kind, particularly if WWF was to move out? How would actually the community be supported by other actors? Thank you.
If I can start, then I will request Pema and Kamal and Jamsingji also to add to me. So regarding now, at present, the role of WWF in Thambang particularly, and in Jimithang also, which basically we started long back in 2004 and 7, which is the oldest CCAs that we have. So it's not much of a hand-holding at this point of a time. We are not much involved in the day-to-day activity which is happening. But yeah, we wherever there is some need, we try to be there if there any kind of a technical support or inputs or advice is required. So we keep interacting. So it's more of a now trying to kind of hand over the whole thing on to them because that was the whole objective, that after a certain point of time, it should be something that WWF will be completely out of the scene. It is the community will be running the managing the CC and doing everything. But it is not that easy because as Jamsingji was telling, this funding is a big issue. We have been struggling a lot for this management committee to have a required fund availability to do their normal activities like covering the cost of patrolling and monitoring, running their CCA management office, which is there. So there has been a challenge that we are facing as a WWF also to convince donor that this is a unique model of conservation. This is a unique initiative of the community. And if there is no funding, fund comes to start the thing, start the process, but there is hardly any donors. It's very difficult to convince the donors to continue the process because for them it's like same thing happening again and again, again and again. There is nothing new, but that's not how the conservation works. So we are struggling in that, convincing the donors. So, but still we are trying to be there whenever is required. Second was about if I'm missing out, Nimaji, the second question.
Cordyceps. Yeah.
Cordyceps, yeah. The cordyceps was anyway, it was an illegal thing. So the problem was also that whatever the economic benefit that the herders were getting, they were not the owner of those resources. The owners were the Thembang villagers. So it was something that was happening, that who actually owned the resources, who should have the first right over the resources in terms of any benefits, they were deprived. But others who were actually coming for grazing, they were just taking away that benefit. So the whole idea was that it's better to ensure that benefits goes to the community who actually are managing, protecting those resources, who own these resources. So the whole idea of this is that there is no ban as such, but we need to have a sustainable extraction plan. Like we have been able to do successfully for Xanthoxylum in one CCA. We've been trying for other NTFs which are there. But cordyceps is little dicey because there is not clear regulations and the market is very not a transparent market which we have so far. So it could have rather put the community in a problem, legal problem, if it would have been extracted openly on a transparent. There is no way it can be done. So that's why we have put a restriction that the villagers decided that let's take a call that we will not let the herders to do these activities, because this is anyway is also hampering the fodder quality for the yak, because this is one of the kind of a component in their fodder when they are in the high altitude grazing, which keeps the yak very healthy. So if you are taking it out of the grazing areas and are selling it separately, it is likely to have an impact on the quality of the fodder the yak is getting when they are up there in the summer grazing. So that was all was discussed in the villages. So they decided it's better to not let the herders collect it. And third, again, I'm sorry, I just
I was asking about the policy environment in the state.
yeah. So this is one thing that we have been trying a lot because whenever there are positive support in terms of in principle support, I will say from the government side, but there is not legal space as such at this point of a time for Arunachal because they need to have they are planning to have a separate Forest Conservation Act for the states, because Arunachal is following the Assam Forest Regulation Act. So we have been trying to tell them that you can have one of these components for the CCA in that act that you are drafting. But we are not very sure how far they will be ready for that. It seems that there are two kind of an opinions that are coming up. One from the bureaucrats who are not very comfortable. They say that it's better to go for a community reserve rather than this kind of an CCA. But politicians seems to be quite impressed with this model, because this is a model where they are not taking care of their resources, but it's also providing some economic incentive for the communities who are managing it. So we are working on it. So probably but it's uncertain definitely that. But that is one of the priority WWF has now, because without that legal recognition, there will be no sustained support for this kind of initiatives. Yeah,
Thank
Pema.
you.
Yeah. So I think like Pema could add little more on this, and Zamsring especially like on the cordyceps aspect. But just quickly to the whole grazing things are also going down slowly, as Pema also highlighted. So that is another aspect also need to be looked at when you talked about the grazing. So Pema, could you just also give little light on this? Yeah.
So I would like to add something on the cordyceps thing. So cordyceps, as such, if it is for the personal consumption and for personal use, there is no problem. But when we hear about a large number of, I mean, like 1 kg, 2 kg, 3 kg of cordyceps, somebody is extracting and selling it in the basically in the illegal market in nearby area, then the management committee basically calls the person and try to basically, management committee put some kind of punishment for that, put some kind of fine for that. But as such, a little bit of cordyceps, some grazers are taking and also the villagers are taking, there is no problem. And regarding the NTFP, um, the NTFP, if it is not harming the natural resources, like there is no large scale extraction is happening. For example, Chirata found very near to my village in the Thembang area. So there are a few villagers, they collect Chirata and maybe 1 or 2 kg they sell it here and there. So there is no problem with that. But if it is a large scale extraction and uh, a full vehicle, I mean, sometimes 100 kg, 200 kg, if it is very large in quantity and basically seems that this is going to harm the basically the uh, availability of the particular medicine and medicinal plants in that particular area, then the management committee takes call on that. And regarding the CCA, so far as our view on that, uh, uh, like how effective and how the villagers are being supported by the CCA model, is basically that is the only tool right now with the village, where the villagers are coming together and they have basically a collective voice against any illegal activity happening on the corner of our forest area. And one very unique thing about our place, like for Thembang, is basically the whole area is not owned by the villagers, but owned by the clan. So all the clans, like we have 4 clans. So all the mountains and all the areas, all the rivers, all the streams, all the forests are divided into clan. So all the clan coming together and basically declaring the area as CCA is basically giving more kind of strength to the whole community, and they are basically collectively putting a voice on whoever like outsiders coming to the village and basically trying to exploit uh, any person in the village, saying that we'll pay you this much of money and you have to give me this much, uh, for example medicinal plants, or sometimes I need 1 truck of timber, I need 1 truck of firewood. So all those things basically has been stopped because of this CCA. So there is, uh, outside people can never come and never basically tell any person right now that we want this and that. Why? Because there is a management committee in place, and all the clan, they have jointly come together, and the management committee, along with the village panchayat, have declared that this is a CCA area now. So from now onward, only personal consumption, like for construction of house, personally in the village, they can take it, and for consumption of firewood in the household level, they can take it, but they cannot basically sell outside the village. So that is the kind of platform CCA has given. Other than that, whether the CCA is having any kind of legal entity, any kind of legal support, it's not basically not a big question for the villagers. The villagers, what they understand is this is giving them the platform to put a voice and basically putting some kind of barricade for the outsiders who were initially before the creation of CCA used to come easily to the village, and sometimes many people from plain area like from Assam or sometimes from other state, they come there and they basically show the villagers one sample of medicinal plants, and then the villagers used to find and collect it from every and any place, and they used to sell it. So this all has been stopped because of this CCA. So there is my submission when it comes to CCA and how it is helping the villagers.
Thank you
Over
very
to you,
much.
sir. Yes.
Unfortunately, even though there's a lot of interesting questions coming, I would have to close this session. And I'd really like to thank Piju, Kamal, Nima ji, Jamji for giving us their time and making this into a wonderful session. I have shared Kamal's email in the chat. So if anyone wants to, can write directly and continue this conversation. Hopefully this conversation shouldn't end, and the purpose of this is to also increase and continue these dialogues. And thank you all, also those who stuck around for this long, and hope to see you soon again in a fortnight for the next CCA. And thank you. And Jessica has also shared her email address. So if you want any information about the ICCA registry, please feel free to write to her. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.